soon as the college entrance exams ended, I secretly went to meet Betsy, my online girlfriend. Little did I know that our meeting place would be a terrifyingly dark alley. I was just thinking about calling her when a group of people appeared. One of them, a young woman, tossed her jacket aside and with a wave of her hand, two bald men rushed forward, knocking down several other men. Hidden in the shadows, my legs turned to jelly. This was supposed to be where I met Betsy. What if they found me? Would they beat me up for no reason? Terrified, I dialed Betsy's number, hoping to change locations. Suddenly, the familiar ringing of my phone pierced the air around me. To my horror, the intimidating young woman pulled out her phone and answered, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Honey, is that you? Have you arrived?" My blood ran cold. I couldn't speak. The woman, my girlfriend, casually stepped on one of the groaning men on the ground. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" came Betsy's worried voice again. I was drenched in a cold sweat. "And no, nothing. Betsy, let's break up," I choked out, my voice trembling. "Did you grab your book? Our first class is advanced math at 8 a.m. sharp." My roommate, Sarah, reminded me. I snapped back to reality, staring blankly at the unfamiliar dorm room and my new roommates. It had been a while since I secretly tried to meet Betsy, but I still couldn't shake the image of her from my mind. Thank goodness I broke up with her. If we had actually met, I might not be alive. "I don't feel like getting the book," Sarah, my roommate, stated flatly. With that, she took off running towards the classroom building. Even with a 10-minute head start, I couldn't keep up. Having barely made it to the classroom building, a small hand grabbed me. The unexpected touch scared me half to death. When I finally focused, I realized it was Betsy, my ex-online girlfriend, standing inches away from me. I instinctively tried to push her away, but she held my hands in a vice grip. My heart felt like it was going to explode. "I'll give you one more chance," she said, her voice cold and distant. "Are you sure you want to break up?" What? Break up? I don't even know you," I stammered. "Oh really?" The ringing of the bell for class coincided with her last word. Betsy finally let go of me, and I fled. I made it to the classroom, but the professor wasn't there yet. Sarah looked at me, noticing my pale face and trembling hands. What happened to you?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm finished," I muttered, shaking my head. "Wait, that's not right. How did she know it was me?" Betsy and I had never video chatted. How could she have possibly recognized me from a simple phone call? It didn't make sense. Before I could recover from the shock, a figure appeared in my line of sight. They had sharp, delicate features that could have been carved from the finest jade. Their eyebrows framed intelligent eyes that crinkled slightly at the edges as if in amusement. An aura of elegance and sophistication clung to them like an expensive cologne. I couldn't help but be captivated. "Wait a minute, that's Betsy." My mind reeled. My ex-online girlfriend was my advanced math professor. Betsy stood at the podium, her gaze sweeping the room. "Anyone who didn't bring their textbook, stand up. You fail this class and will copy the entire textbook as punishment." Beneath her beautiful exterior lurked a heart of ice. Her words, spoken with a smile, chilled me to the bone. My brain short-circuited. It wasn't until Betsy's sharp eyes locked onto me that I snapped out of it and scrambled to my feet. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the classroom, but I could only think about how much my hand hurt. It wasn't me. I started to explain, but Betsy cut me off, a smirk playing on her lips. "Crazy," she purred, her eyes glittering with amusement. I mentally cursed her, but I had to admit that, ignoring the whole beating people up thing, I was incredibly attracted to her. Online dating was like opening a blind box. You never knew what you were going to get. Betsy was definitely a prize. Too bad she was also terrifying. Class seemed to drag on forever. As soon as the bell rang, Sarah grabbed my arm and dragged me out of the classroom. "Don't you know? Betsy broke up with her boyfriend," she explained. "How do you know that?" I asked, confused. "Everyone's talking about it. Apparently, he was head over heels for her, but just look at her now. She's got a face like thunder," Sarah replied, rolling her eyes. I groaned and buried my face in my hands. What kind of monster had I gotten involved with? This is too much. I can't copy the whole textbook, I cried, throwing my pen down on the desk in frustration. "Well, you'd better get started," Sarah said, passing me a container of lo mein. "Unless you want to beg Betsy for mercy. I heard she's a real softie when it comes to students who forget their books," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I stared at the mess of papers on my desk and sighed. She was right. I should at least try to apologize. And who knows, maybe Betsy still had feelings for me. I quickly gathered my things and hurried to Betsy's office. I knocked, but there was no answer. I knocked again, but still nothing. Dejected, I slumped to the floor outside her office and scrolled through my phone. Time seemed to crawl by. After what felt like hours, my phone finally died, and Betsy was still nowhere to be seen. I gave up and headed back to the dorm. Sarah told me that Betsy had gone to the Icon group for an emergency meeting and probably wouldn't be back for a while. Somehow, I had a feeling she was doing it on purpose. I spent the next few days agonizing over my advanced math textbook. Betsy had to have been sent from hell to torture me, I thought bitterly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Betsy returned. Clutching the stack of papers that represented days of my life I would never get back, I nervously knocked on her office door. This time, it swung open, but it wasn't Betsy who greeted me. It was Chloe, a wealthy but kind-hearted girl who was also friends with Betsy. She ushered me inside, where Betsy sat at her desk, looking as intimidating as ever. Betsy glanced up at me and then at Chloe, who seemed to understand without a word and excused herself. I awkwardly held out the stack of papers, but Betsy just stared at me. Finally, she took the papers from me, not even bothering to look at them before tossing them in the trash. I forced a smile and gritted out, "Is there anything else, Professor? Are you sure you want to break up?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "I don't understand what you're talking about," I replied, trying to to keep my voice steady. Don't play dumb with me, honey, she purred. I laughed nervously, my mind flashing back to that night in the alley. It was just a joke. To my surprise, Betsy laughed. She got up from her desk and walked towards me. It was evening, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. As she drew closer, I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. I froze, unsure of what to do. Before I could react, Betsy wrapped her arms around me in a tight embrace. I stood there stiffly, unsure how to respond. I could feel her soft breath on my neck, and for a moment, I forgot all about my fear. Don't do this, I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. I don't like it. Betsy pulled away slightly, her expression unreadable. You don't. I wanted to scream. What was wrong with me? This was Betsy, the woman who could crush my skull with her bare hands, and I was worried about hurting her feelings. That's not what I meant, I blurted out, my hands clenching into fists. It's just, not the right time. To my surprise, Betsy smiled. Then, she did something that completely shattered my carefully constructed defenses. She leaned in and kissed me. My mind went blank. All I could feel were her lips, soft and warm against mine. For a moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The sound of the doorbell broke the spell. Chloe walked in, announcing that someone from the administration needed to speak with Betsy. Betsy reluctantly pulled away and followed Chloe out of the office, leaving me standing there in a daze. I stumbled back to the dorm, my head spinning. I couldn't believe that I was dating my advanced math professor, who also happened to be a total badass. What would people say if they found out? Earth to Lee. Sarah's voice startled me out of my thoughts. She was staring at me with a mixture of amusement and concern. You've been making that face ever since you got back from Betsy's office. What happened? I groaned and threw myself onto my bed. I'm dating Betsy, I said, burying my face in my pillow. What? Sarah shrieked. How? When? Why didn't you tell me? She demanded, bombarding me with questions. It's a long story, I sighed. Let's just say that online dating can be very unpredictable. The next day, Sarah dragged me to our politics class. I couldn't focus on Chloe's lecture, even though she was a great teacher. All I could think about was Betsy. After class, Chloe asked me to stay behind. I wondered if she was upset that I hadn't been paying attention. I have a proposition for you, she said with a mischievous grin. Have you ever wanted the inside scoop on all the juiciest gossip on campus? Before I could answer, she grabbed a broom and thrust it into my hands. Just follow me, and you'll get your reward. But you have to promise not to tell anyone, especially Betsy, she added, lowering her voice. I shrugged and followed Chloe out of the classroom. We ended up in the courtyard, sweeping up leaves. You're really friends with Betsy, huh? I asked as we worked. Best friends forever, Chloe chirped. Although, she can be a bit of a handful sometimes. Speaking of Betsy, you'll never guess what I found out about her, she exclaimed, lowering her voice conspiratorially. My ears perked up. I was dying to know more about Betsy's past. So, get this, Chloe leaned in close. Betsy is an orphan. My jaw dropped. An orphan, I repeated, stunned. That explains so much. No wonder Betsy was so closed off and guarded. I suddenly felt a pang of guilt for how I'd treated her. It wasn't fair to hold her past against her. Yeah, crazy, right? Chloe continued, oblivious to my internal turmoil. And guess what else? Remember how Betsy was seeing that guy? Well, it turns out she was completely devoted to him, but it still didn't work out. It's like she's cursed or something, Chloe whispered dramatically. I felt my face flushing, and I quickly changed the subject. So, what's Betsy really like? I asked, trying to sound casual. Chloe smiled knowingly. Don't worry, I won't tell if you don't want to admit you have a crush on her, she teased. Before I could protest, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Betsy. Want to go out tonight? My treat. I grinned and texted back a quick yes. As soon as class was over, I raced out of the building. I spotted Betsy standing near the entrance, looking effortlessly chic in a simple black dress and heels. I felt a surge of pride knowing that she was waiting for me. I was about to run up to her when I noticed a group of men approaching her. I recognized them as the same thugs Betsy had beaten up in the alley. This time, however, Betsy's usual entourage of bodyguards was nowhere in sight. My heart lurched in my chest. I couldn't let them hurt her. I ran towards Betsy, grabbing her hand and pulling her behind me. What do you want? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. One of the men, who looked like he could bench press a small car, chuckled menacingly. This doesn't concern you, kid. Just walk away while you still can. Betsy, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Don't you get tired of getting beat up? What is it this time? Still upset about the Icon group? The thugs ignored her, their eyes fixed on me. Last chance, kid, the leader growled. I tightened my grip on Betsy's hand, my resolve hardening. Even if it was the last thing I did, I wouldn't let them lay a finger on her. Suddenly, I felt something soft being tied around my eyes. Betsy, what are you doing? I asked, my voice muffled by the fabric. Trust me, she whispered. You'll be safe. I was plunged into darkness. My other senses, deprived of sight, went on high alert. I could hear the sickening thud of fists connecting with flesh, the gasps and groans of pain, the clatter of metal on pavement. Then, as suddenly as it began, the violence stopped. I felt a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. It's over. You can take the blindfold off now. Betsy's voice, though close to my ear, sounded strangely distant. My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the knot, finally pulling the silk scarf away from my eyes. The world swam into focus, but the scene before me was even more disorienting than the darkness I'd just emerged from. Betsy stood amidst the groaning, crumpled forms of the thugs, her elegant black dress now spattered with blood. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of cold fury that sent shivers down my spine. She looked like an avenging angel, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I was too stunned to even breathe, caught between horror and a strange sense of awe. This was the real Betsy, the woman who walked through the world with effortless grace, but harbored a darkness within her that could rival rival any of the men she'd just brought down. She caught my eye, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her carefully constructed facade. Without a word, she took my hand and led me away from the carnage, her touch surprisingly gentle. We walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sound our footsteps echoing on the pavement. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of what had just transpired pressing down on us like a physical burden. Finally, Betsy stopped and turned to face me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'm not who you think I am," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I took her hand in mine, her fingers cold and trembling slightly. "I know," I replied, my voice hoarse with emotion. "But I'm not afraid of you." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. Then, a slow smile spread across her face, transforming her features from beautiful to breathtaking. "Good," she murmured, leaning closer until her lips brushed against mine. "Because I think I'm falling for you, Lee."